For more on this now, we're joined by CBS News White House correspondent Weijia Jiang. So, Weijia, yesterday the president tweeted out a campaign ad. It featured an undocumented immigrant convicted of killing 2 police officers in California. It cuts to the video, that video from the migrant caravan, and then asks voters to consider who else Democrats would let into this country. A lot of people are calling this racist. A lot of people are, it reminds a lot of people of the Willie Horton ad that worked for George W. Bush. How is the president responding to the criticism that he's fear-mongering in these final days?
You know, right before he left for Florida here at the White House, he was asked that direct question. President Trump, are you fear-mongering with all of the hardline immigration proposals that you have rolled out in the past weeks? And he said, no, not fear-mongering at all. He insists that immigration is an important issue. Of course it is. And he says, you know, as we just heard in our colleague's piece, Major Garrett's piece, that the Republicans are the only ones who can really do something about it. And so his argument is that when you see the caravan, it's not just people seeking asylum. You know, he has said many times before that, you know, there are members of gangs in there, mixed in there. He even said that there are terrorists from the Middle East without providing any evidence. And so that is his narrative. He is painting this picture and not addressing the fact that the majority of these people are here because they're seeking refuge and they're fleeing from potentially deadly conditions in their home countries. And so, you know, he argues that it's not worth it. It's not worth risking letting any of those potential criminals over the border because he says they exist. And so this is a page right out of the Trump 2016 playbook. He knows it works. It worked then, and he believes it works now. And so do sources familiar with the campaign who say, look, you can say whatever you want about the president's rough tactics and how aggressive he is, but the fact is he knows it's effective.
Weijia, the president, in what seemed to many to be sort of an off-the-cuff statement yesterday to you, the White House press corps, said that the number of troops deployed to the U.S.-Mexico border could reach 15,000. That's nearly 3 times, as you know, the amount the Pentagon said earlier this week. The caravan, let's remind our viewers, is still weeks, if not at least a month and change away from the U.S. border. It is making its way to an asylum point of entry where they have legal right to seek asylum in the United States. If that asylum is rejected, of course, then they have no legal right to be in the country, but they are doing it the right way. As we know, the U.S. military legally cannot provide any kind of police activity. They can't apprehend or detain people trying to cross the border illegally. Right. 15,000 troops, that's equal to the number we have in Afghanistan. What is the White House saying about that number?
Well, they're saying that it's necessary to stop what President Trump himself is calling an invasion. And he is characterizing this as an invasion of our country, and that somehow all of these asylum seekers are actually here to create chaos for Americans, and that this manpower is needed at the border. But you bring up such an important point that they are not there to apprehend illegal immigrants. They're not there to round them up and you know, send them to border protection and customs. They're there to reinforce those agents that are already doing that job. And it's a very specific job that certainly not 15,000 military personnel can do. Really, the troops sent there will be there as reinforcement. So they'll be able to supply equipment. They'll be able to build barriers. They'll be building housing for additional Border Patrol agents who are deployed there. But they're not there with their weapons out and stopping physically people trying to cross the border. And that is an important distinction, because I think when people who are unaware of this hear that 15,000 troops are going there, that might be the false image in their minds. And so that begs another question about why so many are being deployed there when we already have 2,000 National Guard there doing the exact same job. And so, you know, that is a number that was pretty shocking, because it seemed like he did pull it out of nowhere. Because the day right before, we were reporting what the Pentagon had sent. And so, but President Trump will continue, as we know, to have ideas and then enforce them later. So perhaps he is working on additional troops there, but they have not been officially deployed.
And it's something Anne-Marie and I have talked about, he's the commander-in-chief, so when he says he wants to ratchet up the number of troops to the border to 15,000, which sounds like, as you say, an off-the-cuff statement, we have to cover it, but we know it's not going to happen.
Yeah, right. In the meantime, Weijia, we saw a new clip from Axios was released. In this clip, the reporters are asking the president about his repeated attacks on the media, claiming that the media is the enemy of the people, and whether or not he considers the fallout from those repeated attacks. Let's listen to the clip.
To be honest, like what scares the crap out of me is that if you're saying enemy of the people, God forbid,
I have to fight back. You're right.
No, but hold on a second. But one second. But this thing, God forbid that you've got fervent supporters. They love you. They listen to you. Enemy of the people. Enemy of the people.
They like me more because of that.
They like you more. But what happens if all of a sudden someone gets shot? Someone shoots one of these reporters.
Jim,
is that? But then I don't think you think we're the enemy of the people.
I don't. But if you gave me false reports, I would say that's not a good thing for our country.
But don't you worry at all? I mean, you are like the most powerful man in the world, and if you say that word, enemy, literally tens of thousands of people go into a stadium to listen to you, and then people go on social media and they get themselves so jazzed up. There's got to be a party that's like, damn it, I'm scared that someone is going to take it
Jim,
too
it's
far.
my only form of fighting back. I couldn't be here if I did that.
You won. You have the presidency.
No, but I did this before I won.
So he says it's the only way he can protect himself, right? It's the only way he can fight back. And he also says that his people, his supporters, love it when he does that. But here we are talking in the wake of two attacks that were politically motivated, right? The explosives that were sent to critics of the president, and then this mass shooting at this synagogue. Though the shooter, the alleged shooter, didn't like Donald Trump, it was the conversations, the dialogue about the caravan that really whipped that guy up. I'm wondering if you're hearing from anyone at the White House that they're a little bit concerned as we move forward, as we come closer and closer to these midterm elections, that this kind of messaging is going to backfire.
They're not, and that comes from the president. That comes from the very top, because the president himself has said so many times that this is not a one-sided fight, that there have been other attacks. He specifically brought up the one during that congressional baseball game against Congressman Steve Scalise and said, look, that was a Bernie Sanders supporter behind that. And so that is what we have consistently heard, actually, since these two attacks, and since the president has continued to defend himself and attack what he calls the fake news media. Their message is that he is simply being reactive, not proactive, that he has to defend himself, and that regardless of who is attacking him, even if it is a major media network, he's not going to just stand down and allow that to happen. And so their argument is that is why he is using this aggressive rhetoric, because he has been attacked first. But what's important here is that he often talks about fake news, false stories, but what he means is stories that portray him in what he perceives to be in a negative way. It doesn't mean that the facts are false, and it doesn't mean that it's not true. It means that he believes it's negative. And actually, something interesting that I noted when Sarah Sanders talks about this, she says negative news rather than fake news. And when she does say fake news, she does say that, but she's mostly quoting the president. I think she does make that distinction, that it's negative. Why can't y'all talk about something positive for once? But to answer your question, no, I don't think they're worried. Their main concern right now is rallying the base to get to the polls.
Yeah, we've heard the talking points about Bernie Sanders. We should point out that Bernie Sanders never encouraged violence among his supporters, in the way the president did, and to be accurate, much of that talk was happening while he was a candidate, right? But still, Bernie Sanders never did anything like that, and he was very, he condemned the shooter immediately after the incident as well.
Yeah, it is something too to point out. Jon Stewart had an interesting side to Christiane Amanpour in an interview he did, where he says that these attacks on our institutions, like the press, exposes a narcissism that exists in journalists. And the only thing I would say to that, and I respect Jon Stewart, is that, the reality is I don't see journalists pushing back on individual reporters that the president is attacking. They're attacking an enshrined foundation of our republic, which is enshrined in the Constitution, which is the freedom of the press. And that is what people are talking about, not an individual attack other than that, guy in Montana, Gianforte, who actually did
he was physically attacked
a reporter, which the president then praised at a rally just a couple of weeks ago.
Exactly.
Weijia, thank you so much.
Thank you.